The moving truck pulled away from the old Victorian house, leaving Lisa Martinez standing on the front porch with her 2 children and a pile of boxes that seemed to mock her decision. The house looked even worse in person than it had in the real estate photos, with peeling paint hanging like dead skin from its weathered boards and windows that stared back at her like hollow eyes. She had bought this place with the last of her divorce settlement money, and now she wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Jake, her 12-year-old son, kicked at a loose board on the porch steps and made a face that said everything about what he thought of their new home. Emma, 14 and still angry about the divorce, crossed her arms and glared at the house like it had personally offended her. Lisa took a deep breath and tried to summon the enthusiasm she had felt when she first saw the listing online, back when this place had seemed like a fresh start instead of a prison. The house sat on 5 acres of overgrown land in rural Colorado, 40 miles from Denver and what felt like 1,000,000 miles from their old life. Lisa had fallen in love with the idea of space, of quiet, of a place where they could heal from the chaos of the past 2 years. Her ex-husband had fought her on moving the kids so far from the city, but the judge had sided with her when she explained that she could not afford anything closer on her teacher's salary. The real estate agent had been honest about the house's problems, which was more than Lisa could say about most people lately. Built in 1887, it needed everything from new plumbing to a complete electrical overhaul. The roof leaked in 3 places, the heating system belonged in a museum, and the basement flooded whenever it rained hard. But it was theirs, and that meant something after 2 years of lawyers and custody battles and sleeping on her sister's couch. Lisa pushed open the front door, which stuck and groaned like it was in pain. The smell hit her first, a mixture of old wood and dampness, and something else she could not quite identify. The previous owner, an elderly man named George Patterson, had lived here alone for 30 years after his wife died. He had done his best to maintain the place, but time and loneliness had won in the end. The kids followed her inside, their footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. The house felt bigger without furniture, but also more intimidating. Emma immediately started complaining about the lack of cell phone signal, while Jake wandered around touching everything with the curiosity that had gotten him in trouble since he could walk. Lisa had 3 months of summer vacation to make this place livable before school started. She had saved every penny from her teaching job and had a small inheritance from her grandmother that would cover the most urgent repairs. The plan was simple: fix what was broken, make it beautiful, and prove to herself and her children that they could build something good from the wreckage of their old life. The first week was a blur of contractors and estimates and reality checks. The plumber, Pete Williams, was a kind man in his 50s who had worked on old houses his whole life. He took one look at the basement and whistled low, the way people do when they see something that will cost more money than anyone wants to spend. The basement was where the real problems lived. The foundation was solid, built from local stone that had weathered more than a century without complaint. But the pipes were older than disco, and the electrical system looked like something from a mad scientist's laboratory. Wires ran everywhere, without apparent logic, and several outlets sparked when Pete tested them. It was during his inspection that they first noticed the strange metal panels hidden behind rotting wooden boards along the far wall. Pete pointed them out to Lisa, running his weathered hands over the surface with a puzzled expression. The metal was unlike anything he had seen before, smooth and dark, and completely free of rust despite the basement's dampness. Jake immediately decided the panels were the coolest thing about the house. He spent hours down there with a flashlight, tracing the edges with his fingers and making up stories about secret passages and hidden treasures. Emma thought he was being ridiculous, but Lisa noticed that even she came down to look when she thought no one was watching. The metal felt warm to the touch, which was odd considering how cold the basement stayed even on hot days. Lisa had asked George Patterson about it during the final walkthrough, but the old man had just shrugged and said the basement had always been peculiar. He mentioned something about unusual acoustics, how sounds seemed to echo in ways that did not make sense. They learned what he meant during their first night in the house. Lisa was trying to fall asleep in the master bedroom when she heard it, a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At first she thought it might be the old refrigerator or maybe the water heater, but when she went to investigate, the sound stopped. Jake heard it too, and like everything else that caught his attention, he became obsessed with figuring out where it came from. He would lie on his bedroom floor with his ear pressed to the boards, listening for patterns. Emma claimed she could not hear anything, but Lisa caught her doing the same thing when she thought no one was looking. The electrical problems got worse during their second week. Lights would flicker in the evening, always in the same sequence. 3 quick flashes, then a pause, then 3 more. The television in the living room would turn itself on at exactly 11:30 each night, always tuned to static. Lisa had. Pete checked the wiring twice, but he could not find anything wrong. Jake thought it was the coolest thing ever. He started keeping a notebook, documenting every strange occurrence with the dedication of a young scientist. Emma continued to pretend she was not interested, but Lisa found her reading Jake's notes when he was not around. Lisa told herself it was just an old house settling into new ownership. Old houses had personalities, her grandmother used to say. They needed time to get used to new people, like shy animals learning to trust. But late at night, when the humming started again and the lights began their mysterious dance, she wondered if maybe Jake was right about there being something special hidden in their basement walls. Whatever it was, it would have to wait. They had a house to fix and a new life to build, and strange metal panels were the least of their worries. Pete Williams had been working on old houses for 30 years, but he had never seen anything like what happened when his sledgehammer hit that metal panel in the Martinez basement. He was trying to run new water lines to the upstairs bathroom when he noticed that one section of the wooden boards seemed hollow behind the strange metal. Lisa had given him permission to remove whatever was needed to get the pipes installed properly, so he figured he would just knock out the rotting wood and work around whatever was underneath. The first swing of his hammer made a sound that was all wrong. Instead of the dull thud he expected from hitting metal, there was a sharp crack followed by a hissing noise like air escaping from a tire. Pete stepped back and called for Lisa, who came running down the basement stairs with both kids close. Behind her, the metal panel now had a spider web of hairline cracks spreading out from where Pete had hit it. As they watched, the cracks grew wider, and a soft blue light began to seep through the gaps. Jake pushed forward to get a better look, but Lisa grabbed his arm and pulled him back. The light was getting brighter, and now they could hear something. That sounded like machinery starting up after a long sleep. Emma, who had been pretending not to care about the basement mysteries, was now staring at the cracked panel with her mouth open. The blue light pulsed in rhythm with the humming sound they had been hearing at night, and tiny sparks danced along the edges of the cracks like electricity made visible. Pete set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his workshirt. He had seen a lot of strange things in old houses over the years, but nothing that glowed or hummed or filled the air with the smell of ozone. He looked at Lisa and shrugged in the way that meant he was way out of his depth, but willing to keep going if she was. Lisa made the decision that would change everything. She told Pete to carefully remove more of the wooden boards so they could see what was behind the metal. Jake bounced on his toes with excitement, while Emma tried to look bored. But Lisa could see her daughter's hands shaking with anticipation. As Pete pried away the rotting wood, more metal panels became visible. The entire back wall of the basement was covered with a strange material. hidden behind a facade that had probably been installed decades ago. The panels were covered with intricate patterns that looked almost like writing, and several of them had small circular indentations that glowed with the same blue light. When Pete's crowbar finally broke through the cracked panel completely, they all heard the sharp intake of air that meant something had been sealed tight for a very long time. The hole was just big enough for Pete to shine his flashlight through, and what he saw made him sit down hard on the basement floor. There was a room behind the wall. Not just empty space, but an actual chamber with smooth walls, and what looked like equipment scattered around on tables and shelves. The blue light was coming from several sources inside the room, casting strange shadows that moved even though nothing seemed to be moving. Lisa borrowed Pete's flashlight and looked through the hole herself. The chamber was about the size of their living room, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above the flashlight beam. Along one wall stood what looked like cabinets or control panels, covered with the same circular lights they had seen on the metal panels. On a table in the center of the room, she could see papers or documents scattered around what might have been some kind of device. Jake was practically vibrating with curiosity by this point, begging to be allowed to look. Emma had given up pretending. She did not care, and was demanding to know how there could be a secret room in their basement that nobody had told them about. Pete was muttering something about building codes and permits, and now none of this made any sense. Lisa made another decision that surprised even herself. She told Pete to make the hole bigger so they could get inside and see what was in there. Part of her knew this was probably not the smartest thing to do, but a bigger part of her needed to know what George Patterson had known about this place and why he had never mentioned a secret room filled with glowing equipment. It took Pete another hour to remove enough of the panel to create an opening they could crawl through. The metal was tougher than it looked, and his tools seemed to have trouble cutting it. Several times his saw blade would stick, or his drill bits would get hot enough to smoke, but eventually he managed to create a gap big enough for an adult to squeeze through. Lisa went first, flashlight in hand and heart pounding, the air in the chamber was different, cleaner somehow, like it had been filtered or purified. The floor was smooth and level, made of the same strange metal as the panels, but without any of the decorative patterns. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she could see that the room was much more sophisticated than it had appeared through the small hole. The cabinets along the wall were not cabinets at all, but some kind of control panels with dozens of the circular lights arranged in complex patterns. Some of the lights pulsed slowly, others stayed steady, and a few flickered in sequences that almost looked like they might mean something. Below the lights were what looked like switches or buttons, but they were shapes Lisa had never seen before. The central table, scattered among what were definitely papers covered with handwriting, sat a device that defied easy description. It was roughly the size of a shoebox, but shaped like nothing Lisa had ever seen, with curved surfaces that seemed to flow into each other without clear edges or corners. Several thin rods extended from the top, each one topped with a small crystal that gave off its own soft light. Jake came through the opening next, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the impossible room. Emma followed reluctantly, but Lisa could see her daughter trying to process what she was seeing with a logical mind that made her so good at math and computers. Pete brought up the rear, shaking his head and muttering about insurance claims. The papers on the table were covered with handwriting in English, but the words were old-fashioned and formal in a way that suggested they had been written long ago. Lisa picked up the top sheet carefully and read the first few lines by flashlight. What she saw made her sit down heavily in the nearest chair, which was made of the same flowing metal as everything else in the room. The paper was dated 1889, and it began with the words that would haunt her dreams for weeks to come. My name is Dr. Henry Clark, and I have been chosen to serve as liaison between humanity and the beings who call themselves the Kethvar. Lisa spent the next 3 days reading every single page that Dr. Henry Clark had left behind in the hidden chamber. The journal told an impossible story, but the evidence was right there in front of her eyes, humming and glowing in ways that made her question everything she thought she knew about the world. Jake had claimed the chamber as his personal research station, setting up a camp chair and bringing down snacks while he studied every device and panel with the intensity of a scientist making the discovery of a lifetime. Emma pretended she was, only helping to keep her little brother from breaking something important. But Lisa could see her daughter's fascination growing with each new page. They translated together. Dr. Clark had been a professor of engineering at the Colorado School of Mines when something extraordinary happened to him in the summer of 1889. According to his journal, he had been camping in the mountains west of town when strange lights appeared in the sky one night. Instead of running away like most people would have done, Clark had stayed to observe and document what he saw. The lights had landed, and beings unlike anything in human imagination had emerged to make contact with the curious scientist who showed no fear. The beings called themselves the Kethvar, and they were refugees from a dying world on the far side of the galaxy. Their sun was growing unstable, and their entire civilization had been forced to abandon their home planet in massive ships that could travel between the stars. Earth had been chosen as a temporary stopping point, a place where they could rest and repair their vessels before continuing their journey to find a new permanent home. But the Kethvar had a problem that Clark's journal explained in careful detail. Their ships were damaged from the long journey, and they needed certain rare metals and energy sources to make repairs. More importantly, they needed to remain hidden from the primitive human civilization of the 1880s, which was nowhere near ready to learn that life existed beyond Earth. The Kethvar had studied human society and determined that contact with their advanced technology could cause panic, wars, or the collapse of human civilization entirely. Dr. Clark had been chosen as a liaison because of his scientific knowledge and his calm reaction to first contact. The Kethvar needed someone who could help them gather the materials they required while keeping their presence secret from the rest of humanity. In exchange, they offered to share some of their knowledge and technology, but only small amounts that would not drastically change human development. The hidden chamber had been built as a communication and research station where Clark could work with Kethvar advisors to slowly introduce selected technologies to human society. The journal describes several successful projects, including improvements to mining equipment and electrical systems that had been credited to human innovation, but were actually based on alien science. Emma was the first to figure out how this control panels worked. Her experience with computers and programming gave her an intuitive understanding of the patterns in the lights and switches. She discovered that touching certain combinations of the circular lights would cause the panels to respond, displaying information in symbols that slowly began to make sense when compared to Clark's notes. Jake found the most important discovery 3 days after they had first entered the chamber. While exploring the darkest corner of the room, he had noticed a panel that looked different from the others, covered with what appeared to be a thin layer of dust or corrosion. When he wiped it clean with his shirt, the panel immediately came to life with lights and sounds that were unlike anything they had seen before. Lisa rushed over to see what her son had activated, and together they watched as symbols appeared on what was clearly some kind of display screen. The symbols meant nothing to them at first, but Emma quickly found references to them in Dr. Clark's journal. It was a communication device designed to maintain contact with the Kethvar ships wherever they might be in the solar system. The device had been broadcasting a signal for over 130 years, waiting for someone to find Clark's laboratory and respond. As Emma worked to understand the controls, following instructions that Clark had carefully written down, they began to realize that the signal was not just a beacon. It was a distress call. The journal's later entries told a darker story than thus. The hopeful beginning. Dyer Clark had lost contact with the Kethvar in late 1889, just a few months after the chamber had been completed. The last transmission he had received spoke of critical damage to their main ship and an emergency landing, somewhere beyond Earth's moon. The Kethvar had managed to send one final message before their communication systems failed, explaining that their survivors would enter stasis chambers to wait for rescue. They had been waiting for someone on Earth to find Clark's laboratory and use the communication array to re-establish contact. The technology in the chamber represented a test of sorts. If humanity could find the hidden room, understand the equipment, and choose to help rather than exploit what they found, it would prove that the species had evolved enough to be trusted. With greater knowledge, Lisa felt the weight of that responsibility as Emma continued to work with the alien communication system. Her daughter's fingers moved confidently over controls that had been designed by minds that thought in ways completely different from humans. But somehow the logic of the system was beginning to make sense. Emma explained that it was like learning a new programming language, except this one had been written by people who understood the universe in ways that human science was only beginning to imagine. Jake had appointed himself as the official recorder of their discoveries, filling notebook after notebook with drawings and descriptions of everything they found. He had also taken it upon himself to organize Dr. Clark's papers, sorting them by date and topic with the careful attention to detail that had always made him good at school projects. On the fourth day, Emma managed to establish two-way communication with the signal source. The response came immediately, as if someone or something had been waiting by their radio for over a century. The message was transmitted in the same symbol system that Clark had documented, and it took several hours of careful translation to understand what it said. The Kethvar were still alive, still waiting in their damaged ship somewhere in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Their stasis systems were beginning to fail after so many years, and they had perhaps months before their life support would give out entirely. They had been sending their distress signal continuously, hoping that someone would eventually find Dr. Clark's work and respond, but the message contained more than just a plea for rescue. The Kethvar explained that their original plan to quietly repair their ships and leave the solar system was no longer possible. Their enemy, a species called the Havoc Rune, who specialized in conquering and strip mining entire worlds, had followed their trail across the galaxy. The Havoc Rune were still decades away from reaching Earth's solar system, but they were coming. The choice now facing Lisa and her children was bigger than just helping a group of stranded aliens. The Kethvar technology could give humanity the tools they needed to defend themselves when the Havoc Rune finally arrived, but only if humans proved they could be trusted with such power. As Lisa looked around the impossible chamber at her children, working with technology that challenged everything she thought she knew about the universe, she realized that their quiet summer of home repairs had become something that could determine the future of the entire human race. Lisa had never thought of herself as someone who could change the world, but as she stood in the alien chamber, surrounded by technology that defied explanation, she realized that ordinary people sometimes found themselves in extraordinary situations. The Kethvar had been waiting for over a century for someone to find Dr. Clark's laboratory, and now that responsibility had fallen to a divorced teacher and her two children, who were supposed to be spending their summer fixing up an old house. The communication with the stranded aliens had revealed the full scope of their situation. The Kethvar survivors were trapped in their damaged ship somewhere in the asteroid belt, their life support systems failing after more than 100 years in stasis. They needed rescue, but they also needed to know that humanity was ready to face the threat that was coming. The Havoc Rune were still decades away, but when they arrived, Earth would need to be prepared. Lisa made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of calling the government or the military or anyone else who might take control of the situation, she decided to trust her instincts and work with what she had. Her family had found this technology, and her family would figure out how to use it. She called Dr. Amy Chun, a physicist who had worked with her ex-husband before the divorce, and who had always been kind to the children. Chun lived in Denver and specialized in experimental energy systems at the university. Lisa had always liked her because she explained complicated science in ways that regular people could understand. And more importantly, she was someone who could be trusted with a secret that could change everything. When Lisa called and asked her to come out to the house to see something incredible, Amy agreed without asking too many questions. The look on Dr. Chun's face when she first saw the hidden chamber was worth all the risk of bringing her into there. Secret. Amy stood in the doorway for a full minute, her mouth open, before she stepped inside and began examining the alien technology with the careful attention of a scientist who understood just how impossible everything she was seeing really was. Jake immediately appointed himself as Dr. Chun's assistant, showing her around the chamber and explaining everything they had discovered. Emma demonstrated the communication system and translated some of the messages they had received from the Kethver. Lisa shared Dr. Clark's journal and the history of how the chamber had been built. Within hours, Amy was as committed to helping the stranded aliens as the rest of them. The plan they developed over the next 2 weeks was ambitious beyond anything Lisa had ever imagined. The Kethver had provided technical specifications for building a rescue beacon that could guide their automated repair drones to Earth. The drones were small spacecraft that had been designed to operate independently, gathering materials and making repairs without direct supervision. If they could build the beacon and activate it properly, the drones would come to Earth and help establish a base where the Kethver survivors could be brought to recover. The problem was that building the beacon required understanding alien technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed. Dr. Chun brought her expertise in energy systems, but even she was struggling to comprehend how the Kethver power sources worked. The specifications called for materials that did not exist on Earth and energy levels that seemed impossible to achieve safely. Jake's extensive reading of science fiction novels turned out to be surprisingly useful in understanding concepts that had no equivalent in human science. He could look at a Kethver power coupling and immediately grasp how it might work because he had read about similar ideas in dozens of books. Emma's programming skills allowed her to interface with the alien computer systems in ways that even impressed Dr. Chun. Lisa found herself becoming the project manager, coordinating between her children's enthusiasm and Dr. Chun's scientific knowledge. She had no formal training in any of the sciences involved, but her years of teaching had given her the ability to break down complex problems into manageable pieces and find creative solutions when the obvious approaches did not work. The first breakthrough came when Emma figured out how to access the Kethver databases stored in the chamber's computer systems. The aliens had left behind detailed tutorials and reference materials, but they were written in ways that assumed the reader already understood advanced physics and engineering. Emma created a translation program that could convert the alien technical language into simpler terms that humans could follow. Dr. Chun was amazed by how quickly they were all learning to work with technology that should have taken years to understand. She told Lisa that the human ability to adapt and improvise was allowing them to find solutions that even the original Kethver designers might not have considered. They were combining alien science with human creativity in ways that created entirely new approaches to old problems. The beacon they were building was a hybrid device that used Kethver technology powered by human-built energy systems. Dr. Chun had figured out how to modify standard electrical components to generate the specific frequencies the alien systems required. Jake had suggested using multiple smaller power sources, instead of trying to build one massive generator, an approach that turned out to be much more stable and efficient. Emma had programmed their computers to interface with the Kethver communication array, creating a control system that could be operated by humans while still maintaining compatibility with alien protocols. The result was something that neither species could have built alone, but that worked better than either approach by itself. Working 18-hour days in the hidden chamber, they slowly assembled the rescue beacon according to specifications that they were still learning to understand. Pete Williams had become their unofficial security guard, making sure no one else discovered what they were doing, while also helping with the construction work that required traditional tools and techniques. The most challenging part was testing the beacon without accidentally sending a signal that might be detected by Earth's space agencies or satellites. Dia Chun had calculated that the beacon's transmission would be unlike anything humans had ever seen, and they could not risk having it discovered by the wrong people before they were ready to reveal what they had found. The Kethfor had been patient. During the weeks of construction, sending encouraging messages and technical advice when the human team ran into problems they could not solve. The aliens seemed genuinely impressed by how quickly their new human allies were learning to work with advanced technology, often commenting that it had taken their own species much longer to develop similar capabilities. As they prepared for the first test of the completed beacon, Lisa looked around at her unlikely team and realized that they had become something she had never expected. Jake had grown from a curious 12-year-old into a serious young scientist who understood concepts that most adults could not even pronounce. Emma had transformed from an angry teenager into a skilled technician who could make alien computers do things their designers had never imagined. Dr. Chun had become not just a scientific advisor, but a true friend who shared their vision of what humanity could become if given the chance to prove itself worthy of joining the larger galactic community. Even Pete had evolved from a simple contractor into someone who understood that they were working on something that could determine the future of the entire human race. The beacon was ready, and with it, humanity's first real chance to rescue the Kethver survivors and begin preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. The rescue beacon activated at exactly 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in late July, sending its signal racing across the solar system at speeds that human science said were impossible. Lisa stood in the hidden chamber with her children and Dia Chun, watching alien displays show the beacon's transmission reaching out toward the asteroid belt where the Kethvar survivors waited in their damaged ship. The response came back faster than any of them had expected, confirming that the rescue drones were already on their way to Earth. The Kethvar message that followed the confirmation contained information that changed everything Lisa thought she knew about their situation. The aliens explained that their enemy, the Havoc Room, were not just conquerors who strip-mined worlds for resources. They were a species that believed the galaxy belonged to them alone, and they systematically destroyed any civilization that might one day challenge their dominance. Earth had already been marked for elimination, not because humans posed any current threat, but because the Havoc Room could see humanity's potential for rapid technological advancement. The timeline was more urgent than anyone had realized. Havoc Room advanced scouts were only 30 years away from Earth's solar system, not the 50 years they had originally estimated. When they arrived, they would expect to find a primitive world with no defenses and no knowledge of what was coming. If Earth appeared to be more advanced than expected, the Havoc Room would simply send a larger invasion force to make sure the job was completed thoroughly. Dr. Chun sat down heavily in one of the alien chairs as the full implications became clear. Humanity had 3 decades to advance from barely being able to reach their own moon to having the technology needed to defend against an enemy that had conquered hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. The task seemed impossible, but the Kethver offered a solution that was both generous and terrifying. The alien survivors were willing to share their entire technological database with humanity, giving Earth access to thousands of years of scientific advancement in energy systems, space travel, weapons, and defensive technologies. But there was a condition that reflected everything the Kethver had learned about the nature of civilization and survival. The technology could only be used to defend Earth and help other peaceful species. If humanity ever used Kethver science to become conquerors themselves, the automated systems would shut down and destroy every piece of alien technology on the planet. Lisa found herself facing a choice that no mother should ever have to make. The easy path was to contact the world's governments and military leaders, turning over the alien technology and letting people with more training and authority decide how to prepare for the coming threat. But Dr. Clark's journal contained warnings about what had happened to previous species who had tried that approach. When advanced technology was controlled by small groups focused on power and control, it inevitably led to wars that destroyed the very civilizations it was supposed to protect. The alternative was something that had never been tried before in galactic history. The Kethver databases contained plans for creating a network of hidden research stations around the world, each one operated by small groups of trusted individuals who would slowly introduce new technologies through channels that appeared to be natural human discoveries. Instead of giving humanity advanced weapons to fight the Havok Rune, they would give humans the knowledge needed to advance their entire civilization to the point where they could defend themselves. Jake was the first to understand what his mother was really considering. Instead of becoming heroes who saved the world, they would become guardians of a secret that would transform humanity over the course of decades. They would watch other people get credit for breakthroughs that came from alien databases, and they would never be able to tell anyone about the incredible journey that had started with fixing up an old house. Emma surprised everyone by supporting the plan immediately. She had been thinking about the problem from a programmer's perspective, and she realized that trying to upgrade humanity's technology too quickly would be like trying to run advanced software on primitive computers. The system would crash, taking everything down with it. But if they upgraded the hardware gradually while teaching people how to use new software, they could build something stable and powerful. Dr. Chun brought up the obvious question that none of them wanted to address. How could a small group of people, most of them with no formal scientific training, possibly coordinate a global effort to advance human civilization while keeping the whole thing secret from every government and military organization on Earth? The logistics alone seemed impossible. Never mind the technical challenges. The answer came from the Kethver themselves, who had been monitoring Earth's communication systems for over a century and understood human society better than humans realized. The alien databases contained detailed profiles of thousands of scientists, engineers, and researchers around the world who had the right combination of skills, ethics, and independence to be trusted with pieces of the larger puzzle. Many of these people were already working on projects that could benefit from carefully introduced alien insights. The rescue drones arrived 3 days later, landing in the field behind the house under cover of darkness. Lisa watched from her bedroom window as machines that looked like metallic jellyfish began constructing what appeared to be a sophisticated laboratory complex using materials they created from local soil and rocks. By morning, the construction was complete and hidden under camouflage systems that made the field look exactly as it had before. The Kethver survivors arrived a week after that, brought to Earth in medical pods that kept them stable while their bodies recovered from more than a century in stasis. There were only 12 of them left from a colony ship that had once carried thousands, but they were the repository of their entire civilization's knowledge and the key to humanity's survival. Lisa's house had become the headquarters of humanity's secret transformation. The basement chamber was now connected to the alien facility in the field through tunnels that had been carved by machines that worked faster and more quietly than anything humans had ever built. Jake and Emma had been given access to educational systems that would teach them more in a few years than most humans learned in a lifetime. Dr. Chun had accepted the position of Earth's first human coordinator, responsible for identifying and recruiting the scientists who would form the network of hidden research stations. Pete Williams had become the project's security chief, using his knowledge of construction and maintenance to help build facilities that would remain undetected for decades. The final message from the Keth4 databases was addressed specifically to Lisa, acknowledging her as the human who had made the choice that would determine her species' future. The aliens had seen many worlds face the decision between immediate power and long-term survival, and most had chosen poorly. Humanity's willingness to take the difficult path of gradual advancement, rather than the easy path of instant gratification, was what convinced the Keth4 that Earth's people might be the allies they had been searching for since their own world was destroyed. As Lisa stood on her front porch looking out at the field where an alien research facility was hidden in plain sight, she realized that her fresh start had become something bigger than she ever imagined. The old house that was supposed to be a refuge from her old life had become the birthplace of humanity's journey to the stars, and her children would grow up knowing that they were part of the generation that would either save their world or watch it burn.